This is the 26th of January 2012, and we've had yet another interesting week.
Historic.
Yes. It's only, well, it's a fortnight since we started this current series of reviews of First Minister's questions, and I was just looking at the one we recorded on the 12th of January, and at that point we were saying this is a historic week because we'd had 10 days since Cameron had announced that Westminster were going to take control of the India referendum.
I remember the run-up over the summer and the autumn, and, that period, and you have a look through the papers for Independent, Salmond, SNP, and there was nothing there. You were lucky if you got an article a week. Now you've got 5, 6, 7 a day.
You're right. I mean, it took Cameron to
put his foot in it.
They couldn't. They were high. They were almost invisible. The Unionists had been invisible for 6 months. Don't forget, we had 3-party leadership contests to complete.
Well, probably might not have been a bad idea for them to stay invisible after Mr. Wallace's performance last night.
Oh, you're talking about Lord Jim Wallace.
But what you're getting is just the British establishment. That's how you got it initially with Cameron, these rebels and Scots, just give them a wee slapping and put them down. Didn't work. Then you've got the Quisling types like Mr. Wallace, of course it's Britain, of course it's Britain.
Yeah.
And then gets at least he has a large Q stamped on his forehead, yeah.
But for a man educated in Glasgow to refer to the Scots as them, Westminster as our.
Who was this?
Andrew Neil.
Did he?
On Daily Politics.
How long? What do they actually have to do to make the Scots realise that it's Northern Britain, a colony, but Northern Britain at the best? That whole bit. It's the whole idea. You're not going anywhere, and if you want to go anywhere, we'll organise it. The whole lot.
There's no point sounding frustrated about the current situation.
No, because Salmon's really pretty well.
Did you take on board that Anthony Barrett's article from Open Democracy yesterday?
Yeah.
Did you agree with what his conclusions?
More or less.
Did you have time to read it?
I did, yeah. Yes. I think overall, yeah. It's what we've been talking about. I mean, the SNP are so far ahead.
So organised, they know what they're doing, they've had a strategy, they've been planning this for at least 20 years.
Oh, and the rest, if you watch Salmond today is probably one of the best I've seen. I mean, he was confident, optimistic, he had all the answers, and he was actually looking at the camera, other than the other ones who were glued to their bit of paper on the table. And they were dire, particularly Mont, which is really depressing. It proved to be ineffective.
Don't be so rude, it's Lamont.
Lamont.
Every time you've got a Lamont, the rest of the Labour Party in Scotland go,
Lamont. This Lamont. It's, where's the facts? Where are the facts when she was talking about the economy? Repeating what's already been rebuffed over the last weeks. It's like scaremongering. The thing is, I mean, using that kind of tactics, it's the amount of people out there that aren't political will believe it. If you repeat it often enough, there will be enough people out there that will believe it. In other words, they'll go out and they'll vote on false facts, on scaremongering.
But to hark back to the debate last night, I mean, she kept banging on about the
currency.
No, the Electoral Commission.
All right.
It was almost as if she hadn't read the consultation paper.
Probably
going on about, you have to let these people, because they're the proper people, And you're sitting there thinking, wait a minute, they've agreed. The stumbling block for them was who the Electoral Commission reported to. Now it's agreed they report to Holyrood, so the SNP don't have a problem with it.
Look, there's no point diving straight into the meat of today's FMQs, because perhaps we should have done a separate programme all about yesterday's launch of the...
My apologies.
That's that's fair enough. No, we didn't. We should have discussed that before we sat down with the cameras on, but that's fine. but I think it'd make more sense because as we talk about FMQs today, we won't be able to not refer back to what happened yesterday.
It's all one over one though, isn't it? Because most of the FMQs is just the repetition, particularly from the Mont, as I was going to say, Wullie, Mitty,
Well, yeah,
Mitty.
well, yeah, but, it would be better rather than referring to something that is that we all know happened yesterday.
But maybe some people haven't seen it.
No, well, to some extent. Well, look, yesterday for me was a historic day. I think I can remember vividly where I was at the main referendum, the referendum that gave us the Scottish Parliament. And that day I drove up to Carlton Hill, to the Brazier, to the used to be a workman's hut,
Yep.
parked up there. And the guys that ran that, it was a vigil for Scottish independence. And one of the guys that ran that used to come into the pub, the St James Oyster Bar at the top of Carlton Road, every night when I worked in there. Used to work in there 3 or 4 times a week. It was in here as boozer. And so I knew him, I forget his name. He used to dress up with feathers in his hat and all the rest of it. I think he was actually in an English accent. He used to wear a trilby with lots of fisherman's hoops and things and all the rest of it.
Probably worked for the security services.
Probably. But I went up there and had the car radio on, and I was parked beside the Brazier, and the guys, not just the car radio, and I'm standing there warming myself by the Brazier with the guys, and the results were coming in on the car radio, and it was just like, I just felt emotional. And then yesterday again, to me that was a historical day again, because going into the Parliament yesterday to hear a Scottish government announce the date and the wording of a referendum that could mean that by 2016 Scotland's an independent country. That was one of the consequences of yesterday's announcement, because that's part of the programme. If they get a yes to independence in 2014, it's in the plans that the next election for the Scottish Parliament will be in 2016 and May 2016, and that will be the first election of an independent Scotland.
But if you let reality take hold a bit, and if you look at the polls when it comes to outright independence, then it's literally 2 to 1 against.
You've not followed the polls.
Well, it's around 40%. 40 to
40%, yes.
No, don't take the poll that was issued. Where was it? Was it the Scots one? I can't remember. Was it 41 to 44%? That was in a UK poll of 1,000 people.
There are a lot of polls, but the 2 to 1 hasn't been 2 to 1 for a year.
Absolute tops is 1.5
2/5.
to 1.
It's about 2/5.
It's been much closer than that, and don't underestimate the capabilities of the SNP voting machine.
Oh no,
They are regarded as the most sophisticated political machine in Europe at the moment.
It's not getting them to vote. It's the way this is going now with Cameron and everything else. I mean, they're probably Salmon's best allies,
Well,
because no Devo Max.
Yeah, what about-
They'll anoint people that would not go outright independence. When they're just left with that one, then just might go, well, stuff you then and vote for independence. And if you're around 40 to 60, it's not that huge amount of people really.
Devo Max is the pint before the nip.
Yeah.
Devo Max is the taster. That's the one that's everybody thinks is fairly reasonable, more powers, take responsibility, raise your taxes. If that's not on the ballot paper, I think the SNP have calculated if it's not on the ballot paper, they'll vote for independence.
I think it is quite sophisticated. I think listening, as I say, having read Anthony Barrett's article yesterday, and considered a number of very good articles this week, Jerry Hassan, or a couple of others, there is this is not the programme to go into the depth of that. All I would say, what I was trying to sum up, was that the race has started. Cameron started the race on the 2nd or 3rd of January, whenever he did his announcement, but the SNP and Salmon are still...
They're off the blocks.
They're off the blocks and
All
running.
the others are still on the blocks.
I mean, as far as I can see, the Unionists are still the changing room.
But if you have a look as well, I mean, that whole idea is, you said it, they've been planning for salmon, they all know exactly what they're doing. Everybody's going, oh look, they forced him into it. You get a feeling when he said the date. No, he was waiting for the right and opportune moment. Now, you had that 7 times asked to a Tory minister about what's happening on child poverty. Couldn't answer it.
Or David Mundell this week.
Couldn't answer it. That's where the Tories are. You see them with their health service, the way they're doing with the health service. Everything that this alleged coalition, which is a true blue Tory government, by the way, just with gutless Liberals backing it up, so they can get a ministerial cut.
Excuse me, I'm sorry, it's worse than that. Did
Probably.
you see the named 32 Scottish Labour MPs that voted last week to privatise the NHS?
Oh.
The list.
Yeah, but then they started
I
off,
think
didn't
your
they?
friend Leslie Hind was on that list. Not Leslie Hind, the other one, Sheila Gilmore, is that the other one?
Sheila, quite possibly, yeah.
Mark Lazarevich wasn't.
No, he won't. No, Mark.
It's the big problem for me personally is that there isn't going to be, there certainly hasn't been to date, there isn't going to be a reasoned, informed debate. And it's actually not because the information isn't there, it's because one side
It's going to tell lies.
is still in
and
a
it's going to be
changing room.
negative. And
Well,
negative
it's not
and
even
negative.
that, Stuart. It's this idea that they're just not organised enough. They don't have leadership. Labour won't sit down with Tory. I mean, look at today. Joanna Lamlin and Ruth Davidson asked the same question.
They were focused on
They
the Bank of England.
couldn't even phone each other up and say, right, I'm going to ask about this, hit him with something else. Salmond had one set of answers that he used for both questions. The Bank of England is not an issue, and most people who are informed understand that it's not going to be about currency.
Can I just bring in it's an area of discussion that the SNP never mention, but you see it on the nationalist forums, and that is issues like, when it comes to if you're going to have a negotiation, if after you're going to have a negotiation and the United Kingdom splits apart, you have 2 successor states. Effectively, let's not be rude about the Welsh and the Irish, but effectively it's the original Act of Union 1707 will be repealed. You then have 2 successor states which have to negotiate assets and liabilities. And amongst the assets that need to be divided is the Bank of England.
The gold reserves.
Well, but
No, Gordon Brown sold them all.
Not all of them.
No,
Just most of
but
them.
anyway, you get frivolous references to dividing up the embassies, or who gets the Falklands and who gets Ulster. But look at the reality.
Argentinians.
The reality is that the Bank of England, apart from the first 13 or 14 years of its existence, has been the Bank of Britain. It should have been called the Bank of Britain. For some reason or other, it's been called the Bank of England. That has fooled an awful lot of people. Anyway, my point is this: that's just one example of the SNP won't talk about that as a possible explanation for a lot of these attacks, but there's a lot more of them. You take the Navy when it comes to defence. Unfortunately, a large part of these nuclear weapons of mass destruction will belong to a successor Scottish state,
Well, yeah.
which has to be negotiated away.
I mean, that is an interesting one because there's nowhere for them to go.
You see that there is still
They
this.
have to stay at Fastlane
Well, that's true, but
until
what
somewhere else is
Did
built.
you not see the scaremonger in
Yeah,
there?
but my point is this: that people still haven't got it. Even you guys haven't got it. When the United Kingdom ends, England and Scotland are equals when it comes to. All right, you've got assets and liabilities. You will then divide them up according to geographical areas, population, but they're both. The Bank of England equally belongs to Scotland as it does to England.
Well, I
The
think,
British Army equally belongs to Scotland as it does to England. People just don't seem to grasp that.
I think we do grasp it. I think what the problem is that the Unionists will never talk about it that way. They will talk about them belonging to the Union, of which Scotland is no longer a part.
Well, my point is this, coming back to the SNP and strategy and tactics, they don't talk about it at all. I think there's stuff in the back pocket. They're not talking about now,
Yeah, because they've got plenty of
which
time.
they're going to bring forward.
Oh yeah.
And then they'll sync them. They will sync them with the weight of their arguments, the weight of their figures. Because that the other week with Salmon with his figures, Salmon's very good with his figures. Particularly there, because not so much that he's good, but the others are really terrible. You watch Joanne Lamont coming out with the same one, and then you watch Davidson coming out the same one again, and you go, God, they must have thought they woke up last week because they come up with the same questions. And then Wullie Rennie, I think, as long as I've seen him, he asks the same question. I mean, he must have some kind of
I think what you
learning difficulty or something.
What you got with the Labour Party in particular in Scotland is they're so used to standing up, making statements, and they're lackeys in the media in Scotland regurgitate it, and they believe it's true, no matter whether it's true or not, and they expect the public to believe it.
Why does Wullie Rennie pick a subject?
Colleges funding.
That his
3 times in a row.
Well, his UK party has lied on, has totally ignored its manifesto commitments, and he stands up week in, week out and talks about college education funding.
Because he's not very bright. Comes to mind.
Are these guys? I mean, I it came to me the other day. I have a theory that everybody in every political party in Scotland wants independence. They just can't say it, and that's why they're so incompetent on the so-called unionist side.
It's interesting if you actually watch the Parliament as much as I have watched it in this last couple of weeks, and them being in there yesterday. Talking about Wullie Rennie. Wullie Rennie sits in front of who? Tavish Scott.
Tavish Scott.
He's forever turning round to Tavish Scott. It's as if Tavish Scott is
Pulling the strings.
Because he actually has a kind of confident smile on his face. And now you've actually said that, what you're looking at the look on Tavish Scott's face is going, watch it, he's made another idiot of himself. Are you not glad you... But it was me, but it was me. But the Lib Dems on the whole, I mean, I've never been enamoured of Lib Dems because you never know what they mean. All they ever want is a ministerial car to wander about to do it, and they dig the granny up themselves.
It has been interesting. I mean, they've been in power in the border since the year dot, well, since I first got there, and they took over from the Tories effectively.
And they destroyed it. They ended up with a 20-odd million deficit.
A lot of that was David Steele. David Steele was hugely respected in the borders, hugely.
Well,
But his council was completely incompetent.
He did well for the borders, I think.
Yeah.
But, I mean, he was a heavy hitter. You know,
For a local politician.
and until what was that comedy program came along?
Oh yes, Spitting Image.
Spitting Image.
And they had him in Lord Owen's pocket.
I remember this was during the election with the
They
Liberals.
destroyed it.
Well, they did. They destroyed
Now,
it.
what they were like was the top of Morningside as you're heading off to Greenbank. It's when they're doing all the developments, and this thing was affecting one side of the street. It's where you come out of the City Hospital. Was affecting
What's
one
this
side.
about, Phil?
This was a development, and they put out 2 separate leaflets, same candidate, one for one side of the street saying they supported it, one for the other side of the street saying they didn't. So they get the 2 votes, even though they were lying to both.
Oh, so this is a Lib Dems.
Lib Dems, yeah. I mean,
Right.
how do you tell when a Lib Dem's lying? He wakes up, he breathes, opens his mouth.
Right then, guys, we've talked a wee bit about the general
I
background.
put my knife back in my pocket. All right.
The general background. What about let's go back to First Minister's questions today. Unfortunately, the BBC were late switching over, so we didn't get Salmon's first announcement. But I gather he spoke about all party talks. We're now.
I think what he said was he was sending a letter out about all party talks. Personally, I'd like to see the content of that be something along the lines of, no having them. Going to speak to the people of Scotland first, which has been their line, and it's a very difficult line to argue against.
But certainly that's what, of course, Joanne Lamont has been asking for the last few weeks. All party talks to discuss the referendum.
And do you want to watch the sting this will be? You watch one of those 3 of those parties, or even all of them, will find some way not to, or to screw up the talks, because it's like he goes yes, they go no, he goes no, they go yes. So the fact that he's now asking them, they'll start turning around and finding something the matter with Sam.
So then, anyway, they moved on. So did that get?
There wasn't a law on it. As I say, I picked up on the tweets because the BBC, as you say, were late getting across.
That's another issue. The BBC coverage of FMQs is appalling, but that's by the by. What I did pick up, of course, was her first meaty question. Joanne Lamont's meeting was talking about this. What does she mean by an independent country? And then she goes into, well, if you can't control your money supply, you're not an independent country. But then, of course, Salmon came firing back, and that was wonderful. Bank of England has been free since 1997 and was made free by Gordon Brown, the Labour Chancellor. I thought she was shot down in flames from that very first answer.
And then he shot her down with Gordon Brown after, when she started going on about Fred the Shred, you know, like it was Salmon's appointee, it wasn't one of Salmon's advisors, and that Salmon put him up for a knighthood. All Labour owned goals. But do you know what gets me with Lamont? It's and I was sitting looking at it, it's the way when she says something like that and thinks she's smart, and then she looks rude, and it's that glacier, aren't I clever? And then Salmon just goes, no you're not.
Anyway, so Salmon came back with well, it wasn't him that knighted it was the Labour Party that gave him his sir. Also it was Gordon Brown. He was apparently, we're talking about Fred Goodwin here, that's RBS and Fred Goodwin, because we have gone a bit vague on this, but and it was Gordon Brown that had Fred Goodwin as a special economic advisor, not Alex Salmond, regardless of whatever
propaganda,
whatever embarrassment is in that letter that's been going around from, you know, where First Minister Salmond did say congratulations to RBS on a big mistake, them taking over that Dutch bank. But anyway, I think again you're right. He came back and another mistake that Joanne Lamont said. She admitted she wasn't an economist, and then tries to attack an economist for the economy.
Yes, painfully obvious though, isn't it?
But what a silly thing to say.
But again, I mean, the real politic of it was the issue that Salmon brought into it about the oil and gas. Now, with the amount of oil and gas that Scotland would have at their disposal, the Bank of England would be listening. I'm sorry. I mean, there's a huge thing there, and if they didn't listen, the European Union would want to know why.
Well, I wouldn't, without going all the way down to on what I was saying earlier about the fact is that two successor states, the Bank of England would be partly Scots anyway. It was interesting too that below that level you can assume that two successor states, if they were in a currency union, even just a transitional currency union, there'd be Scottish politicians on the board, or whoever gets appointed. And there'd be Scottish representation on the Bank of England board.
The presumption that seems to be being made by both the Conservatives and the Labour Party is that Scotland's interest is discussed on any level at all. It's not discussed on any level. It's the UK interest that will be discussed in Scotland.
Well, they did point out there are only 2 Bank of England employees working in Scotland, and they've never taken into account the Scottish interests at the moment, so why should it be any different?
Well, to be frank with you, I doubt anybody's interest but the southeast of England and the banking sector's interests are taken into account.
Well, see that bit we just said there, and the name just popped straight up in my head when you were talking about, and it's Joe McAlpine, and what she said and was accused of saying about them being unpatriotic. And all they did today was, again, talk down Scotland. And if you talk down the country, scaremongering, I'm sorry.
It's new scare story time.
Is that unpatriotic or is that unpatriotic?
I'm thinking of running a list off of Twitter and then putting up a daily
scare story.
Just new scare story latest edition. So because
it's well open to abuse. When can you imagine? You know, Scottish water is English water for a start.
Because we own it now. We bought it. But it's that thing. I don't like the word patriotism because I mean that is the last refuge of drugs. I mean it's patently untrue. Whereas Salmon, if you notice the word he was using quite often today, which was fallacious, which was
what does fallacious mean? Did anybody look this up?
It must have been like you. They're all going to wonder what that is. They're all sitting now reading it in the dictionary, going, "He's just called us a liar. He's just called us a liar."
No,
Untruths. It's a fallacy. It's
Oh, right, a
malicious.
fallacy.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the other one, who was it used? I think it was
The adjective from fallacy.
Joanne Lamont. She used obfuscated in the
No, that was Ruth. That was Ruth.
Oh, sorry. Yes.
That's hiding. That's hiding.
Yeah.
Sorry, well, let's
Not quite like.
should we move on to Ruth then? What was interesting too, she started off this week, instead of, you see, it's traditional that Conservatives normally ask, when is the First Minister going to meet the Prime Minister?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And when Ruth took over a couple of weeks ago, she carried on the tradition from Animal Goldie, but not this week. She said, when was the First Minister going to meet the Secretary of State?
Once he gets over his chicken pox.
Yes, well,
Also known as the Governor General.
So
really?
So how did she manage to use obfuscated? It didn't sound grammatically correct. It sounded as though she'd used the word. We'll see.
Well, she basically asked the same question as Joanne Lamont. I'm doing it now. Lamont.
See, say it often enough, other people follow it.
And she was trying to claim that he didn't answer the question. I'm afraid he did answer the
I'm
question.
afraid sometimes it's true that he doesn't answer the question, but he definitely answered the question.
They just didn't like the answer.
That's
Yeah.
right.
You know that thing Salmon does where somebody will ask him a long convoluted question and he'll get up with a one-word answer? I would love to see him start doing that about the bank. You know, just get up and go, no, wrong, sit down.
Well, look, now Ruth Davidson, things I noticed, she obviously looking for sound bites again, because these are what clearly the opposition leaders are looking for, a sound bite that gets on the telly and all the rest of it. Her soundbite was the salmon shilling. Apparently that was her suggestion that a Scottish currency might be called.
I thought,
Yeah, but it's pathetic, isn't it? It is.
I did go
It's
off on a bit of a
pathetic.
tangent with that one, with Ecky's mark and etc. etc.
Yeah, we can have a laugh, but I mean, you know, it's this whole idea where they're going on about, well, same with the Tom Harris bit, with the coronation of King Salmon and all the rest of it, you know.
This is the Labour Party.
Oh yeah,
We
but,
all
but there is a one, the Unionists. I mean, it's throwing up untruths. They're all backing each other up. I've never heard Joanne Lamont having a go at Davison, or Davison having a go. They back each other up all the way.
They do
It's
these
all-
days.
Yeah, that's all they're doing. It's
Yeah,
one party. Same in
the-
Westminster.
The other thing I noticed about Ruth Davidson is she keeps using the word assert. This is yesterday she used it.
She's an assertive woman, obviously.
Well, that's an interesting point, but she uses it in connection with. She keeps saying that a salmon assert or the SNP assert. She keeps, in other words, what she's banging away at. She's saying what she's saying all the time is that nothing that is said by the SNP
It's true.
salmon is true.
Yeah.
And she even said
The context she's
asserting.
using it as, in the context that she's using it, yeah, she's more or less calling them liars. Or playing with the truth.
What she's
Making
saying,
it up.
she's calling them inaccurate. Is really, well, what she's really trying to do there is undermine any serious basis to what they're claiming.
Yeah.
And the Unionists really have nowhere to go but there
No.
at the moment until they rally the troops.
They've got more than rallying the troops. One must assume that Westminster, up there and down there in Whitehall, the civil servants, must be civil servants there that have had a reserve position, as they would say, the Sir Humphreys of this world.
Yes.
They must have had a reserve plan, even if it was sat in a dusty pink folder on the bottom shelf down there for the last 20 years, for when this current situation with the SNP, a popular SNP government came along.
No
Surely-
reserve plan, Stuart. It's been there, and it's been in operation since the Second World War.
Well, it's certainly been in operation since.
The Tartan Army, all these
Since
other
the oil.
things, that it's all since the
since
oil.
the oil.
They've got a sniff of oil. It's always been there.
Do you think that it's
Active.
But at the moment, all I can see is a very dusty, out-of-date plan being wheeled out. Apparently, it's George Osborne that's in charge of the.
Yeah.
There.
In the Twitter sphere yesterday, I was a Twitter line attached to a Telegraph article, and there was a guy on that who basically his position is right. No, have your independence. I'm presuming it's English, he might not be, but I'm presuming it is. And all we'll do is we'll blockade your oil, and we'll just take all your oil. And that's going to be, not in quite such stark terms, that's going to be a battleground for them. Because the assets Scotland have got, as well,
we've got the
obvious since Wilson, have what has kept Westminster government's afloat.
Well, we've got. Don't forget. Not only do we've got hydrocarbons. That's what Salmon prefers to talk about, which includes the oil and less gas. They've got a lot of gas.
Don't forget the amount of coal we've got, by the way.
That's where I was going to get into. We've also a lot of coal which they keep pulling out of the ground. I know it's controversial because they use these open cast things, but there are existing huge reserves of energy in Scotland that it is, and plus we've got the renewable potential.
But the point I was going to make on that is the Unionists can't use the argument.
What argument?
They can't use the argument that we should stay in the Union to bolster everybody else, because they've already shot themselves in the foot by using the argument that we're subsidy junkies.
Well, this is it. This is what we mean. I mean, we know how Labour are the biggest hypocrites around, because they say on the one hand we're too poor, and then they say, well, if we're not too poor and we go independent, we're abandoning all the poor people in England. I mean, it's
yeah, but
what's it all about?
There is another to what I think. I mean, I have a historical way of looking at it, and if you're looking at one of the most toxic nations on this planet, it was called Britain, the British Empire. And if you don't think that lot south of the border, the establishment, are not capable of, sorry, my family all come from Ireland, I've seen exactly what they're capable, what could happen to Scotland.
Okay, but that's true. Okay, look, but it was just a double negative there. I'd be worried. I wasn't quite sure what you said. But yes, I mean, there's been this nutter in the Ulster Unionist wants to partition Scotland. We've had this Earl of Caithness, an unelected peer of the realm. He wants to keep Caithness, Orkney, Shetland, and the Western Isles
in the Union,
in the United Kingdom. There's this. Back to the Ulster Unionist. He decided that there should be a partition of Scotland. All the counties along the border with England should be partitioned off. You're right, I mean, there are nutters around who would go to goodness knows what lengths.
They call it massacres and murders, which is usually the British what the British do.
Can I pose a question to you, right? You buy a lottery ticket on Friday and you win the Euro Lotto, you win 20 odd million. What would you finance? What part of this debate would you finance to get to the truth?
I would finance an independent broadcasting organisation broadcasting into Britain, because that's the key weakness of the current demolition.
They wouldn't give you a licence to.
Right, well, wait a minute. You
say they've shut down Press TV.
Yeah. You say an independent.
Yeah.
Why don't you just go for a fully supportive of the union?
Well, yes, it would be if I was rich enough.
Of independence.
Yeah, but that's what I mean by that. And then the structure, the way that broadcasting is controlled, and the fact that it hasn't been devolved to Scotland in particular, and yet it's partially devolved to Wales. That's another big issue that has really still not been tackled. And don't forget, the Scottish Broadcasting Commission reported, I think something like 4 years ago, I made a presentation to them. I forced community radio into the report. But when it came to the Holyrood, all the parties of every MSP voted unanimously to set up a Scottish digital broadcasting channel. Nothing's happened. So there's a huge potential there. If I was a rich SNP or pro-independent supporter, especially if I was living abroad, I would finance pirate radio. I would just finance, broadcasting the thing into Scotland.
You know what I'd finance?
Satellites, it would be.
I would finance one for the unionist lunatics. You wouldn't need to do one for independents. If you did one for the unionist lunatics,
just let them loose
on the petition and let them loose.
But
have you any idea how many people? Any idea how many people would vote for independence?
Yes, but the problem with that, yeah, you're right in a way. But there is one serious problem with that is the more you let these people, the extremists out of the bag, the more likely you are to encourage a genuine edge which will use violence, and that's the last thing.
Yeah, but
absolutely
then depends how Machiavellian you are. You let it go so far, right, as it is. It's just your financing it, aren't you? How long does it take before the finance comes out? And then is it not news? Is it not worldwide news? So why you pull the finance? Because now people see the truth. And see what is there.
To return, well, I'd like to finance a thorough, accurate paper on the economics of an independent Scotland.
Who'd you get to?
It would have to be somebody that was neither for nor against.
Stiglitz.
But that's what I would do, so that you could lay out in front of everybody that has a vote, everybody, including the English, exactly what the economic situation would be projected to what?
I think that's tougher
2020.
It would not be just hard. The money. I think that's really hard.
But I'm continually coming across things, according to the Jers report, 2.8 million is spent in Scotland, whereas in fact it's not. It's 2.1 million. The embassy one. Why does the Scottish Quango promoting whisky get charged £3,000 a pop, and the English Quango gets charged nothing for using the embassies?
Well, I wouldn't.
How, and I would go that far. I would go that far because I have it in my head that there are things that don't go into the Jers report that Whitehall buries.
Oh, I don't think you'll get any doubt there. To return to FMQs, which we.
Can I bring up one person? Wullie Rennie.
Well, he's next. He's on the list. I wasn't even certain that he would get a question, bearing in mind he 1 week and 3 doesn't.
Fiona MacDonald got in before him.
That does happen. They put in other people. Yes,
but does he not just waste his time anyway?
So he went on about he decided that the Scottish government got an extra 400 million more than they were promised in the UK budget, which was announced last October. November. And according to his calculations, the Scottish government had 400 million extra. Why didn't they spend it on the poorest college students? And I must admit, I don't know what the strength of the SNP government argument is on why there seem to be some cuts in that area. But certainly Salmon came back and just completely floored it with the cuts had originally been 36% from London. They're now reduced to 32%, but that still meant the figure he came up with was the fact that this 400 million, it wasn't that there was 400 million pound more, because there were still 2.6 million in cuts.
Yeah, 2.6 billion. Yeah.
Instead of 3 billion cuts they had to make in that sector, there were now 2.6 billion.
And he could have come back and asked them why he was concerned about it, as his party at national level had basically aligned in a manifesto. Please sit down and be quiet until you learn to be honest.
About the supporting students.
Yeah, I mean,
they signed these commitments.
Why?
Before the election, the Lib Dems.
And Salmon let him off the hook.
I'll tell you what the funniest bit of the whole FMQs today, which I think you guys were talking at that moment, is when he must have had it. Wullie Rennie must have had it written down.
Yes,
because he came up with that. He accused Salmon of looking into Swinney's eyes.
Yeah.
Now, as he was saying that, John Swinney was sat between Alex Salmon, and looking. John Swinney was looking at Wullie Rennie, and Alex Salmon was right behind him. So Alex Salmon was looking into the back of John Swinney's head. What on earth took Wullie Rennie to say such a stupid thing?
Did you see the look in Swinney's face? Swinney's face is going, when did they let him out? Do you know? I'm sorry. I mean, Walter Mitty. He's very much a Walter Mitty character. He doesn't appear to actually be there. You know, he's not even. Or Billy Liar. You know, he's probably sitting in his mind. He's somewhere else, even though he's standing in the chambers. He just doesn't look off this planet.
And I think Simon's final put down, of course, was about that he turned it over about Sweeney.
Yeah.
He says, "Wouldn't you just love to have the people like John
To
Sweeney
be able to look round and see
to
people.
ask for assistance?"
Because there's no good. Yeah, and if you noticed, the libs are all laughing at him. Because I mean, he's like the court jester or something. I mean, he's just. Maybe I'm sure the other thought, let's have a wee bit of a laugh. Let's give this.
What about this David Mundell issue, which we referred to? Now, apparently it was on Good Morning Scotland yesterday morning or the day before. This refers to the fact that this morning's debate in the Parliament before First Minister's questions was all about child poverty. This was a topic that the Labour Party in Scotland believe they're strong on.
Fiona Graham asked the question.
And but apparently the key thing that struck me about this was Alex Salmond is putting a recording of a Westminster government minister,
the only Conservative,
the only Tory in Scotland, who 7 times was asked a question about child benefits and welfare cuts basically from Westminster, and didn't answer 7 times. Now Alex Salmond's putting that into the Hollywood record. Now that must be quite controversial, shall we say?
Oh yeah.
Look at this grin on his
Oh yeah, lovely.
But was Mundell answering the question because Chicken Pox Boy wasn't available?
I don't know.
It's his brief.
He's the junior minister. It was probably part of what he's
brief.
Talk about Mundell. He's probably responsible for that.
He was deputy.
It's all part of his part.
He is his deputy. This whole area, by the way, of welfare.
Mind you, he must be a very busy laddie. He must have, how many, 20, 30 red boxes for Scotland, because there's only one of them?
Dear me.
It must be, well actually, you know, when you think about it, the only Tory in Scotland, you know that comedy, The Only Gay in the Village.
The only Tory in Scotland. And Michael McMahon has another, we come along there at the end, and that was predictable because if you follow, obviously, if you read the papers, it was in the Herald.
Aye.
And Salmond knew that was coming because McMahon would have had his question. It was on the business bulletin, so he knew that was coming. And basically, Alex Neil, SNP government minister, said that North Lanarkshire Council was not fit for purpose. But according to that, Michael McMahon, that's what he said.
He said a bit more than that, though. He did say there's far too many people working in the education department. He was a bit specific. I thought Salmond.
I saw, but anyway,
squirmed his way out of that. Well, didn't squirm. He walked out.
He didn't need to squirm his way out of it because Alex Neil, however, already said last week, and had already been published, that his target was, and he was referring to people coming in through his constituency off the surgery door, and these are what people are complaining about in North Lanarkshire.
I can see exactly where Alex Neil was coming from, but Alex Neil sometimes, when he gets in a soapbox, he just goes for it, because when he's at a level, he's really a pussycat, but he just goes for it, and he hasn't been specific.
But surely Michael McMahon's boss in the Labour Party must have said to him, okay, we know what Salmond's going to say. When after you've said, they must have known what Salmond's going to come back with.
It comes back to why they're so ineffective.
They just start shouting
across
the board, the back benches.
They don't have. What's happened to the researchers? I mean,
well, we've seen Drew Smith.
Well,
some of them have gone to London by all accounts. That went on yesterday. That was some news yesterday.
Cullen taking them all away.
Some of them they moved to London to work with this. They've got this whole
and they're MSPs.
But they've got a whole department in London to fight for the union, and they've got Labour Party people in it, Lib Dem people in it, Tory people in it, and it's funded and run from Whitehall. Didn't you know that?
Who funds it?
It'll be that shadowy group that's always been to undermine. It'll have representatives from the security services that will be in there. All these things to muddy up the waters, to make people scared, to lie. I mean, you've only got to go back and look at incidents. It's all going about from the minute the oil came along.
There's nobody down there. Have they never come across a drunk Ouija?
Yeah.
12 of them who wants his bus fare. Do they not know the thing that scares Ouijas and Scots least of all is numbers? Ganging up all no work.
It's
won't work.
basically come ahead then, yeah.
You know, okay, I'm going down, but I'm going down fighting, guys. You know.
Well, gentlemen, we've had the usual round table,
Entertaining.
balanced review of
Balance.
the first minister's questions.
We do need to think about co-opting a pro-optimist, so we've got somebody to take the
A
P out of.
pro-optimist. This is exactly your word for a union.
A pro-optimist.
A
It's
pro-optimist.
a bit like an optimist, but pro the union.
Okay, well, it's been interesting again today, and thanks very much.